Welcome, welcome back to Crafting a Meaningful Life. I'm your host, Mary Crafts, and once again, my delight to come to you today. Every time I come to you, I have something new on my brain because when you think about crafting that meaningful life, I mean, how big is that spectrum of what we can talk about? It's truly infinite, and we've talked about so many different things. I have something for you today that I think the actual pinpointed subject matter we've never talked about before. The broader things that we may talk about, we certainly have included in this podcast, but this is something very, very specific. And so to that end, I want to introduce to you my dear friend, Remy Zippel. Welcome, welcome, Rabbi.
Thank you, Mary. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning, and I'm grateful for you having me. So thank you for that.
Well, we first met at a symposium on obviously childhood sexual abuse, hosted out at Cypria, both of us, we love this foundation and what the work that they're doing. And I saw you up on stage, and I hadn't ever had any interaction with you before, which is unusual in that space because I spend a lot of time there supporting that particular kind of direction. And I thought, well, who's this person and what's he and what about? As it came down, you were up there on a panel. As it came down to you, I was I was truly mesmerized by you and by your story. And I was deeply touched by your story. And then to find out that you actually have a book coming out. And I thought I would love to have him on my podcast. So thank you for accepting the invitation.
Well, thank you, Mary. That's very kind of you. And Supriya is an organization that is near and dear to my heart as it is to
Yeah.
yours. And for me, it is something which is profoundly personal, being a survivor of child sexual abuse. And I think the only thing that I would say in response to that very kind intro is I get that sentiment quite a bit. People
Yeah.
will see me at an event around child sexual abuse. And I think we live in a society that still, even till today, has a certain expectation. There's a certain assumption that people have what a survivor of child sexual abuse is going to look like, and I play a large role in debunking that for a lot of people, and I'm grateful for that opportunity. I think that in my healing journey, I also assumed that being a survivor of child sexual abuse meant that you looked a certain way,
Yeah.
and for me, I didn't know what to do with that as I didn't really fit that mold. And so being in a space where I can shatter that mold for other people and create an environment where survivors can be expected to look, of all shapes and sizes and colors and stripes is something which I'm grateful for. And it's work which is, something which is means something new every day. And I'm really grateful for those opportunities.
So what I want to applaud you for is your courage. I think that that's the biggest thing that we can share with others is that when we start to break away those layers and be emotionally naked with people and show that we're all the same as to that we're all different and separate is when the healing starts. In my book, that's I spend so many times on that chapter of that the healing starts when the hiding stops. And you have done that. So let's start with this. I know my listeners are wanting to know, what is your story?
So, as someone who has the book and who has come across that idea of healing starts when the hiding stops, I'd say it pretty succinctly sums up my story. I was raised here in Salt Lake City. My dad is a rabbi, started the synagogue that I now work for, and I was raised in a religious household, which is something which I'm tremendously
Wait,
grateful for.
wait, wait. Your dad is Rabbi Benny Zippel?
My dad is Rabbi Benny Zippel,
Well,
the
go.
one and the same.
Oh, okay. Well, as
I
you can
work for
imagine,
the family business.
okay, you can imagine in my 35 years as Queen of Hospitality and owned Culinary Crafts Catering that I came across many and catered so many Jewish weddings, and that I met your dad many times. I don't know why I didn't put that together until just now.
There's
Wow.
not a lot of Zippels in Salt Lake City, so
No,
yeah,
that's true.
that's
I should have put that together. All right, so on with the story.
um, there were a number of us kids bunched pretty closely together. We were homeschooled as children. Um, There was no Jewish day school back when I was growing up in Salt Lake City. And so we had a caregiver, a nanny, a babysitter, however you want to phrase that. And just after my eighth birthday, our family's caregiver began to sexually abuse me. And make a very long story short, that went on for quite some time. I use the term began in that sentence very intentionally, as I believe in so many of the stories that I've heard. For so many children, there's that pivotal moment where they're compromised for the first time, and it puts them at a crossroads where there's a determination. Is this going to be the beginning of a long-term problem, or is this going to be nipped in the bud and be a one-time problem? And when
So
I
at
was 8
age
years old,
8, you even thought that to yourself?
no, no,
Oh,
no,
okay.
no. Nowadays, with much healing and much therapy and much
Sure.
work, I'm able to look back on that. When I was 8, I didn't know what to do with that, and so I just kind of let it go on, and it would go on for many many years. And I spent most of my childhood from that moment on, doing the hiding that you discuss, and being in that sort of space of isolation, and not knowing what to do with all this, and being assured that this was a secret that I had to keep. No one could know about this. It would be detrimental and dangerous, and who knows what my life would look like if this somehow got out. And that was the status quo for a very long time, until I was able to get the help that I needed, until I was able to engage in that healing journey and to realize that hiding and secrecy and engaging in all sorts of behaviors of that nature were detrimental. They were damaging. They were not in my best interest, and I needed to face the experiences that I had been through. I needed to come to terms with those realities. I needed to embrace them. I needed to be open to them, and that is a lengthy journey. It is a lengthy process. It's an ongoing process. And I think more than anything, it evolves at its own pace. One of the things that I believe in very, very strongly within the healing framework is there is no universal roadmap. There is no universal schedule. No one should feel compelled to get things done at a certain pace within a certain time.
Right.
These things do kind of happen organically, and everyone follows their own calendar in that sense. And for me, that calendar looked like, disclosing to family, disclosing to loved ones, and ultimately with my story being brought into the criminal justice system, grappling with the decision to tell it publicly, to tell my story in a very, very wide format, which was ultimately something which I decided to do 4 years ago this week.
Oh my gosh, so just 4 years ago.
Just 4 years ago.
Okay, so let's go back to the moment you decided and made that decision. I want to talk about that. The decision to stop hiding and to tell your family. What brought you to that point?
Well, I think there's a certain belief that you have to employ at that moment. There's a certain faith you have to have in something outside yourself and larger than yourself. And I think that you expect that that sort of disclosure will be met with certain judgment, will be met with certain scorn, will be met with certain misunderstanding. And you need to hope that the fear of the unknown is going to be less than the pain that you are currently in.
Let's repeat that.
The fear of the unknown, you hope, will be less than the pain that you are currently in.
Yeah, that's a
One of the
critical step.
I would
Yeah.
agree, and I think one of the things that we go through as human beings is we get so ingrained in our current realities, and we can't imagine a world outside that. And as a result of that, we are convinced that the muck that we're currently stuck in, that's just what life is.
Yeah.
There can't be something outside that. There is not something outside that. And the few opportunities that we have to envision what life would look like outside that fill us with such fear and terror without us realizing that the situation that we are currently in is debilitating and crippling in its own right. And at some point, we need to take that step. We need to take that step to imagine that doing the opposite of what we're doing right now might seem daunting, and it might seem intimidating, and it might
Yeah.
seem to be the most fearful thing we'll ever do. But we can't keep on doing what we're doing right now. We can't maintain the secrecy. We can't keep on hiding. And so you've got to take that step. You've got to take that chance. You've got to, take the plunge. And I think you do that once and you have a certain result, and it emboldens you to do it again. And, it's interesting from that step of disclosing to close family, to disclosing to, wider family, to disclosing publicly, to writing a book, you find yourself engaging in that process over and over again. And I will say that it does get easier
Yes.
every time you do it. There's a
Every time.
certain
Yes.
right, there's a certain experience that you gain through that, but at the same time, it's life is full of those fearful moments. Life is full of those
Yeah.
moments where there's that anxiety of the unknown, and at some point you make the decision to take the plunge, and you need to keep your eyes focused forward and go with it.
And even though the fear becomes less, even though it happens much less often, we all still experience those fear moments where we walk up to it and we think, okay, can I walk through this? And it does get easier because you have proof now that you can survive being emotionally naked. You can survive showing people who you truly are and showing your pain. In fact, I think what we discover, Remy, is that that's when we become the most embraced, when we're able to be that way and people want to embrace us through that pain. How did your family react to this?
For them, it was a pretty shocking revelation.
Yeah.
Um, for me, one of the most important pieces of information or pieces of advice that I got ahead of that disclosure was someone told me, it's going to be easy. It's almost going to be a lazy tendency for you and your family in the aftermath of this reality to hindsight is 2020 and kind of, put on
Mm,
rose-colored glasses and think to yourselves that for the duration of this woman's employment in your home, you all kind of saw red flags. No one really cared for her, and it was all kind of, there was questionable behaviors, and that's not true. That is just not the truth. But we have a human
mm,
tendency to feel uncomfortable with being uncomfortable. We don't like being in situations where there's confusion, where there's turmoil, where there's pain,
sure.
and it's difficult for us to accept that a person who was trusted could have done such terrible things.
Yeah.
And it's important to fight that inclination, and it's important to fight that tendency, and it's important to be honest and
Ah,
to grapple with the difficult questions that lie ahead. And that was invaluable advice. It was invaluable advice because I agree, it is easy to allow ourselves to go to a place
mm,
where we're in control of everything, where any sort of compromised situation we saw coming from a distance, and to not acknowledge to ourselves that there was something that happened that we couldn't have prevented. And I think that
mm,
coming to a place where we can practice that honesty with ourselves, no, we did not see this coming. No, there were no red flags that were missed. This was an unfortunate situation, and we need to acknowledge that and deal with that. Is difficult, right?
yeah.
It's difficult, but it's a good skill to learn. It's a good skill to learn to be comfortable with that feeling of uncomfortability, to learn from that, to grow from that, to not always feel like everything can be brushed off and explained away or excused, but to be comfortable with that and to figure out what that means.
I love that concept. And I think you're right. That is a critical one that we don't really talk about. We certainly don't teach that concept of that need to learn to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And that if we are going to heal, that step has to be there. I love that. I don't know if I've really thought about that before, being comfortable with being uncomfortable. But it certainly is that piece that all of us must learn if we're going to really walk into life with any sort of comfort. Like speaking on, like you and I have both spoke on the big stage, and there's that moment that's so uncomfortable. You think, why did I sign up for this? And then you begin to be comfortable with that uncomfortableness, because you know the next step is so important. Wow.
And I'd agree, and I think I'd take it, wider than that. As human beings, there is an absolute guarantee that at some point in our lives we're going to experience overwhelming adversity. And for some people it might be more traumatic, for some people it might be less traumatic. But having that sort of awareness that that is something which we are undoubtedly going to go through, and managing our expectations and preparing ourselves for what that reality will make us feel in the moment is so vital and
Mm,
so crucial.
yeah.
Because if we go through life expecting to be coddled and expecting to skate or float through everything, when inevitably that moment hits, it's going to wreck us, and it's going to put us in a place where we don't see a path forward. And I think instead being in a mindset
Mm,
where we're prepared for the fact that there will be curveballs, and we learn how to adjust to those curveballs, and we're okay with that temporary, or it might be a longer form of temporary feeling of being uncomfortable. I think it really sets us up for the road ahead.
I do too. I love that. That whole concept is, I don't know if I've given it the importance or the weight that it needs to have in my life. I appreciate that awareness. A lot of people who are listening, I know, may have the same question. That when this abuse actually started to happen in your life, what were your thoughts at that point? What I think it's important for us to talk about this kind of detail. What techniques did she use or he use? I don't even know if it's a he or she yet.
She,
She.
she.
What techniques did she use to manipulate you to your silence?
That's a great question, and I love the way you put it. There is a societal assumption, in my experience, that people that do bad things threaten, harm, use tactics that are more motivated by fear
Yeah.
and by negativity. We know statistically that over 90% of children that will experience sexual violence will experience it at the hands of someone that is
Someone they
near and
know.
dear to
Sure.
them, right? So that's going to be a family member, a trusted adult, a teacher, a professional, whatever
Yeah.
whatever that looks like. And it's important to realize that because that is the reality, more often than not, and more often than we'd like to believe, what is going to preempt those situations is not going to be threats and harm. It's going to be flattery. It's going to be compliments. It's going to be a
Ah,
sense of empowerment on a certain level. And this is what we
interesting.
call
Yeah.
today in society. It's what we call grooming.
Yeah.
It's I've always thought about grooming as being a vulnerability assessment of sorts. Grooming is a method that people who have ill intentions will use to determine the safety that a child is in, to determine the
Yes.
mechanisms that a child has at their disposal to defend themselves. And what grooming will determine is, can this child keep a secret for me if I can convince them that keeping that secret is in their own best interests, that keeping
Yes.
that secret will make them feel more adult like, will make them feel more special, will make them feel more trusted. And that was textbook what happened with me. My abuser absolutely employed a lot of those mentalities and a lot of those philosophies, in the sense that the abuse is predicated on the sense that this was a very adult-like experience. This was something which was being done to prepare me one day to be a better husband. This was something which adults did, which was very shrouded in mystery, given the religious upbringing that I had.
Sure.
And as a result of that, this was kind of a glimpse of the future, a taste of something which only adults get to know and understand. And intentionally, I speak about that very openly because I think it's important for people to understand that we still live in a place where, if you train your child not to take candy on the playground from a man who drives a van, then they're going to be fine. And then you've done everything you need to do in your duty as an adult and as a parent. And that is so far from the truth. We live in a different world nowadays where, the odds of your child being harmed by the man in the windowless van by the playground are minuscule relative to the
Yeah.
odds that a trusted adult in their life will take advantage of them. And I
Yeah.
think it's vital we understand that. I think it's vital we raise our children to understand that, because statistically, if we look at the world that we currently live in, that's what's happening. That's what's going on, and it's vital that we have that awareness.
And you and I both know that the stats are that, one in five boys, men, are sexually abused as a child, one in four girls. And so I remember at the last Sapria gala, we were sitting at a table of 10, and we were all women. Oh, I guess my partner was with me, so not all women, but we had this conversation.
90% women.
90% women. So we had this conversation at that one point where we were talking. They gave us time to actually talk about a question they posed to us. And I said, if we understand those stats, two of us at this table have been sexually abused as a child. And voluntarily, two women raised their hands. These were women at my table of people who I had associated with for a long time. Their willingness to risk, to be vulnerable, but to verify, and we all just sat there with this immense love and support. And that brought the reality of what we talk about right here in front of us. It wasn't something out there. And for you to be willing to talk about this, it brings the reality of what is happening to our children right here. How do you think parents begin to empower their children to deal with this kind of a situation without putting the fear into them of not trusting anyone? It's such a fine line. How do parents begin to teach this?
Yeah, that is such a great point. And we live in a world where our children these days interact with so many people across just a variety of professions and backgrounds. And we should not be raising children to go out there in life and see everyone as a suspected bad
Right,
guy, right?
right,
We don't want our we want our children to live in a safe world, in a beautiful world. Um, you know, my wife had a baby last month, and we were at the pediatrician earlier this week, and the pediatrician was talking to us. We are trying to do all the right things, and don't let the baby sleep in the bed, and put the baby in the bassinet. And the pediatrician was talking to us about the bonds of safety and security that children develop at a young age. And so while sleep training and self-soothing is a
sure.
valuable tool, children need to learn, babies need to learn that there's always a parent nearby. And while that's kind of true till about 4 months, it really changed the way I thought about raising my older children, who are not babies, who sleep in their own beds, thank God. But children need to be raised in an environment of safety and security. And so we don't want our kids out there, you know, kind of anxiously checking out every adult they come in contact with. At the end of the day, what it boils down to, in my opinion, is creating an environment for our children where they feel safe to share around us as parents. They're going to encounter whoever they encounter, and whatever happens on some level happens. What will be their reaction in the immediate aftermath of that experience? Are they empowered by us
Mm.
to come and share openly and honestly and in a transparent fashion? Or have we created an environment for our children where, if they're in a situation where they feel potentially compromised, they don't want us to know? They feel like they're going to take care of it on their own.
Yeah.
I have a colleague who I heard a speech of his recently, and he put it into words that I will treasure forever. And he said that there are two types of dads, and the same can be said for moms and
Yeah,
grandparents
yeah.
and everybody else, but he said it about dads. He said there is a dad of a 16-year-old boy who's driving the family car for the first time, and he wrecks the car, and the 16-year-old says, oh my God, I need to call my dad. And there are some dads of 16-year-old boys who are driving the family car for the first time, and they wreck it, and their immediate reaction is, oh my God, my dad is going to kill me. What sort of dad are you? If your child wrecked a family car, what would be their initial reaction, right? If your kid was in a situation where they may have caused harm or damage, of course, unintentionally, and but either they know they're going to be responded to with love and acceptance and non-judgmentalism, or the opposite. Kids sense that. Kids form that opinion very quickly,
Very early,
very early.
very early.
What side, what kind of parent are you? What would your child say if they had wrecked the family car? And I think that's what this boils down to. If our children are in a compromised situation, and are they scared of telling us, or do they know that they're going to run right to us and spill it all out? And that's the decision that we need to be making.
That is probably one of the most clear and concise examples that I've ever heard of that. Of the example of, what did you feel? Because trust me, when I was 16, I did total my family car. One of the first times I flipped it and rolled it. But my first thought was to call my dad. And I call my mom, but I definitely wanted to call my dad. And that question of, are you okay? What, blah, and feeling comfortable with that. And then I think about my own daughter when she was driving our family car for the first time, and the highway patrolman called me and said, she's not able to. She is hysterically crying and saying, my parents are going to kill me. And I didn't ever think about it until this moment when you said that. And that was exactly what happened with my daughter. Now she's 30, and it wasn't until this year we began to heal that relationship of trust. And it's a critical piece that we develop with our children so early on. My boys absolutely would have called me, but she couldn't. Thank you for that example. I think it's something that we can all relate to, and the necessity of having that kind of trust with our children that they can begin to tell us. Now, as I think about where you are, where you were, and where you are, there obviously has been a process for you. You have a book coming out. You've just written a book. Tell me about the book. What's the name of it?
The book is called Not What I Expected,
No,
which is pretty
expected.
much
Yeah.
sums up the mentality that I lived through for a number of years. Going through the abuse, disclosing, going through the criminal justice system. It was pretty much one big
Wow.
loop of not what I expected. And
Not what I
so
expected.
we
Yeah.
decided it was a pretty apt name for the book.
And so there is the link for that. You can, pre-order the book. You can also connect with Remy on his social media accounts. He'd love to have you follow him or look to see what he's doing now and how he's healing. But I look at what happened to you and the trauma that created for you, and the point at which you had the courage to come out to your family, and then to begin the healing process, and then to write the book. I'd like to, maybe it's we have a little bit of time left, but this is where I really feel I'd love to spend some time now. Because if there are listeners listening, and they can relate to every single one of these steps, or they want to understand it so they don't have this happen in their family, it begs the question now, what was the healing process like? Where did you begin? What were the steps? And where are you now? Because so many people are grappling, 25% of the population in our country is grappling with this question. What can you share about that?
I think that if I had to pin it down to a central theme, and Mara, you wrote a book, you understand that, a book pretty much involves finding a central theme and lining everything up kind of
Yeah.
along that point. At some point, I had to grapple with the fact that life wasn't fair, or to be more specific, life wasn't what I had expected. I was born into a certain community, the community which, for the longest time, I was pretty convinced was inoculated from most of society's issues like child sexual abuse.
Sure.
I had a vision in mind. I had a destination in mind. I knew what I wanted for myself. I knew what I wanted from life. I had a pretty good idea of how that would all unfold and what that would all look like. And there was no space for life moving away from that path. I was not going to be someone who was going to struggle with mental health related issues. I was not going to be diagnosed with complex post traumatic stress disorder. None of that fit into the narrative that I had built.
Yeah.
And I had taken time to cultivate that narrative,
Yeah.
and it was really specific and it was really down to the details. And there's only so long you can be in denial. There is only so long you can be in denial. At a certain point, you do need to grab the bull by the horns and acknowledge, okay, this is my life. My life is not what I expected. My life is not the pretty picture that I had painted for myself. My life looks different than I had ever anticipated. Here's the question: different as it may look, can it be as meaningful? Can it be as purposeful? Can it be as beautiful? And naturally, you want to feel like the answer is no, because you want to take so much credit for the rosy, pretty rainbows and unicorns version that you've built for yourself that deviating from that course for a moment feels like such a violation. It feels like such a waste of time for all the work that you put into it, crafting the version of reality that you wished were true.
Yeah.
And then you give up fighting. And then you realize to yourself, you know what? If I, and as a person of faith, if I believe that I'm going to have a life that is going to include and involve doing what God wanted for me in this world, maybe the time has arrived for me to allow God to dictate what that actually looks like instead of me involving God in what my plan looks
Sure.
like. And maybe my life looks different than I had anticipated. Maybe my life is not what I expected. And just because it's not what I expected, it doesn't mean that I should compromise or sacrifice any vision that I had for it at all. And you go through that in processes. You become more and more comfortable with that reality until ultimately you're ready for the whole world to be able to know that and understand that and see that about you. And they can buy it on Amazon. But I feel like that's an ever evolving
Yeah.
process. And I feel like, as human beings, we go through that more often than we'd care to admit, in which we come to grips with certain expectations being shattered, certain illusions that we had about what life would look like
Yeah.
being shattered. And I think that succeeding in life is about, becoming more accustomed to that, becoming more comfortable with that. The sooner you get there, and the more familiar you are with it, I think the better off you'll be.
The sooner we accept that life is about struggle and growth and not about perfection and perfection this life, the sooner we can get on with it. Yeah.
I would agree
Yeah.
strongly.
Wow. And I think that, that change happens when the pain finally becomes so great that our fears then become less in control of us. And when we get so acutely aware of the pain in our lives, then we can change. But as long as we deny it and stuff it and put it behind us and say, that's not part of my life. No, 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 no. There's no chance for healing. No chance. Wow. You've
I
come
agree.
so far with this.
Thank you, Mary.
And as we close today, I don't know, I wish I could express to you, or to my listeners, how touched I am with this story. And the whole time you've been talking, I've been just holding back the emotional tears because I tend to not want to get blubbery on my podcast. I want to be able to speak. But I've been just thinking about this little boy that you were and the pain that you experienced and what that does to the psyche and how much I admire your willingness and courage to come out. It takes a sense of bravery to know that not only am I healing myself, that I have an opportunity to begin to help others heal. And that's why we share these stories. It isn't so that we can say, hey, look what I've been through. We share these stories because we hope, beyond hope, we intend to inspire others to courage, to inspire others to be able to deal with these things that we know are out there. It doesn't matter if it's childhood sexual abuse or whatever the problem was. And that grooming process is so critical to be aware of. I don't know how we teach that to children, but I had a friend once whose father was very abusive, used to beat him a lot, and the next door neighbor could hear this, and so began to be aware. And when he would run out of the house after being beaten, that knew that was his opportunity to say, you are such a beautiful boy. You shouldn't be beaten by your dad. And over the years groomed him to feel safe with this person. And such a critical thing. So many things you've talked about today, I think, are time for us to be aware, to take the lid off this hiding. We don't talk about this. How do you feel? This is my last question to you, I promise. How do you feel we begin to heal not only the individual person, such as yourself? How do you feel we begin to prevent this, not with educating our children? Let's look one step further, with the perpetrator. How does that start healing there? Because I don't want to just deal with the children and teach them. I don't want to just deal with people who are survivors. What about the perpetrator? Where does that cycle end? And how does it end? And yes, you don't have an hour to answer this question.
I'll try to keep it brief then. So I consider myself very fortunate in the sense that I had the opportunity within the criminal justice system to deliver an impact statement at my abuser's sentencing. Many crime victims will use that opportunity to ask the judge to give a certain sentence within a certain framework. And given Utah statute, there wasn't a lot of wiggle room for the sentence. It was pretty clear where it was headed. And so I wanted to use my statement to do something else, to speak unencumbered. And one of the things that I did in that statement, and it's available online, I addressed my abuser in open court. And I shared with her something which I was quite certain of, still am quite certain of. I'm pretty convinced that at some point in her life, she was irreparably harmed by somebody. She had power taken from her at some point in her time on this earth. And sadly, she lives in a headspace where the only way for her to reclaim that power is to then take that power from someone else who's vulnerable and defenseless, which she then proceeded to do. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to be that place where the buck stops. And I think for people out there that are involved in these sorts of behaviors, I think it requires that sort of critical thinking. I'm in so much pain that the only numbing mechanism is to take that sort of power from a child. Am I now ready to get help? It's come to the point, it's deteriorated to the point where that is my only option. That's my only play over here, is to take that sort of power from a child. Now am I ready to get help? And I think that help is there. I think that help is there so long as that it's within the context of honesty and accountability and responsibility. And we hope that people who are in pain and who have been harmed themselves can get the help they need, so that cycle need not continue, because it doesn't have to continue. It really doesn't have to continue. And the more people that we can bring to the place where they can nip it in the bud, the better. And I think that's all we can really hope for as a society.
It was at that very symposium that you and I were at that for the first time in my life, I didn't use the word perpetrator when I thought of the person that abused you. I used the word victim for them as well. That at some point in their life, they were also a victim. And that if we can intercede somehow before they become a perpetrator, and so we're talking now a different generation, but if there was a safe place for all victims to come forward, even those who have stepped into being a perpetrator, to say, I need help. I don't want to do this. I think we have to open up that discussion. And what programs do we have for them? And where is that safe place for them to step forward? It's all part of the solution to this overwhelming problem. Oh, wow.
I would agree.
So much to talk about here. Well,
Indeed.
I wish you so well with your book launch, and it's a story to be told. I hope all my listeners take advantage of buying your book, the pre-sale, and following you on social media. You have an amazing story, and just thank you for your courage. Thank you for your courage of speaking out at the symposium here on my podcast to tell the story, to be the voice that has courage now. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Mary. I appreciate that.
And it's all part of crafting a meaningful life. And to that end, I hope my listeners take all of this courage that has been exhibited by you and think of what in my life can I put behind me if I just step forward with courage? What piece is in my life that I'm hiding, that if I just was straightforward and emotionally naked with it, I could begin to heal? And to that end, I wish you so well in crafting your meaningful life. Thank you.
Listen to the full podcast today and subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and more. Crafting a Meaningful Life with Mary Crafts.